Story you want
Okay.
Do you want me to make opening remarks for you?
Yeah, if you want. Yeah, that'd
Yeah?
be good. Set us up.
Okay.
Okay.
Tell me when you're ready.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Okay. Thank you all for coming today. I'm really excited to see people that I know and people that I don't know, which is even more exciting. My name, if you don't know me, is Jenny Hicks, and I am an English teacher here, and I had the great pleasure of teaching Vanessa Vega in English 2900 when we read, last semester when we read The Handmaid's Tale. It was the first time I taught the class, and it was a really, really fun class, and we had a really good time. And lots of my students that I have now are here, so your classes maybe aren't as fun because you don't have Vanessa in them, but I'm excited that you're here. And so Vanessa's going to talk about it was basically your final project for my class and her experiences, and I think this will be real interesting. The format that was sort of an overview, then talking about the information on the handout, then some questions and answer period. And if you didn't get snacks, make sure you get some snacks. So thank you.
Hi guys. So I'm Vanessa. I am a third year. I transferred from Cerritos College. I've been an English major way too long. I've published, I've worked online, I've done a lot of really cool stuff, but I still haven't finished my degree, so that is the goal. So like I said, like I've published, I've done a lot of stuff, so when they had me take 2900, I was like, do I really need to take a class on how to be an English major? Like I've been at the game for so long, but it literally opened my eyes. Like I come from a school where it was very, like, it was all about rhetoric and analysis and cut and dry arguments, and like the fun part of being an English major was completely like not valued at all. And so you needed to be able to talk about, you know, Shakespeare and all these really concrete things, and it was rewarding and I got really good at it. But I was telling Jenny, when I transferred here, I transferred as an English major purely because I was good at it. Like, I wasn't in love with English, but Jenny actually set up our 2900, our English tutorial, to be fostering and really safe, and we had a good group. And so for our final project, like, we had done pretty standard essays up until that point.
It's the same stuff.
Yeah.
You do a close reading, and then you do one where you can bring in outside sources and provide context. And then the third project, you're supposed to use theory, but I decided it would be more fun to open it up and allow people some freedom.
Yeah, no, and we were talking about it, and people wanted to do different things, and so she was like, you know what? Just do whatever you want. Just write a paper on something. You can recycle one of your old ones if you want. And that was I thought about doing that, and she like casually threw out, you could dress up as a handmaid and, you know, write about that. And I was like super close to playing it safe and rewriting an essay that I had written about flower some symbolism in the novel of The Handmaid's Tale. And then I was like, wait a minute. Like, dress up as a handmaid and like live as a handmaid? Like, why not? Like, she had built us up so much at that point of the semester that I felt like, you know, that's crazy. We could do it. And so my mom knows how to make dresses, and she knows how to like put it together, and so she did. And after that, that's when I kind of started freaking out, like, oh my God. But my mom, she's a dentist by trade. Like, I have no idea why she knows how to sew all these dresses, but she does. And I was like, oh, my poor mother came from her job, and now she made me a dress. Now I can't just like chicken out and like not do it. So I think like within a week, we had everything ready to go. We created rules based off the novel. Like, I couldn't have social media. I ran the blog, but I don't really have friends on the blog. The link would go out to various people, but it was no feedback. I couldn't connect with people. That was one of the rules. I was on a strict diet. In the novel, it goes on about how the handmaids are only allowed to eat what would sustain a baby. So things like candy, chips. Like, there's this weird power scene with a cookie. like the wife is giving her a cookie and it's like, oh, you should be happy that I'm giving a good girl a cookie. Like it's super patronizing and demeaning. So they essentially only eat like whole wheat, egg, protein, veggies, and so I had to live on that as well. I had a boyfriend at the time, and I couldn't have any contact with him, like at all. Nothing, no text, no phone call. I couldn't use friends to relay messages, although that would have been authentic. I could have had a friend say, hey, I'm still alive. But he was fine. There's like a bunch of things I wasn't allowed to do. The biggest thing that I think messed with my mind was that I couldn't address people first. So if you want, like you, I remember meeting you at Cafe 47, and that was a really rough day. I think you met me on day 3. And in day 3, I was getting a little crazy. Like, I was like, you don't think that would mess with someone so much? But it did. Like, human interaction goes a long way in keeping you sane. Even if you don't know someone, like, her talking to me at Cafe 47 was like, oh, I'm a human. Like, I'm not just sitting here like a freaking doll. Like, that's what it feels like. You're in a costume and no one's interacting with you and you're just like, okay.
Also transportation.
Yeah, oh, I couldn't, no cars, none of that, unless I was like driven, like I couldn't drive. So I had to walk everywhere, which killed me. Ugh, hate walking. But what's the other rules? No reading outside of what was specifically assigned for class, which was horrible. I didn't even think that I read that much, but I guess like I do read things online and I read, you know, things that go out, and that was really hard. So the first day I remember really feeling angry at the fact that I couldn't talk, and I felt really bad, and I was, you know, kind of like, oh, this is annoying, but I guess I'll deal with it. And by day 4, like, I had already gotten into a place where it's like, why would I think it hurts so much to not say what I was thinking that I began to dismiss my own thoughts. Like, it was so painful to have these ideas and like just sit on them that I started saying, oh, that's dumb anyway. Who would say that? Like, there was this doubt that started circulating in my mind, and that was a hard thing to come back from. I think we only did it 4 days. That was only a week. The original plan was to go 2 weeks, and I'm sure if I had gone those 2 weeks, I'd have, like, shaved off my eyebrows or done something weird, like
Van Gogh.
Yeah, cut off an ear, mail it to Jenny. But 6 months out, we decided to go back into the novel, and on the handout, I pulled some quotes where after this time has passed, like, these quotes take on a different meaning for me. Obviously, they mean a lot of stuff to Offred, but to me, I can kind of relate to some of the stuff that she says. So, like, the first one is, my nakedness is strange to me already. Did I really wear bathing suits at the beach? I did, without thought, among men, without caring that my legs, my arms, my thighs, my back were on display. Could be seen. Shameful, immodest. I avoid looking down at my body, not so much because it's shameful or immodest, because I don't want to see it. I don't want to look at something that determines me so completely. I can relate to that. It was really weird. It's never like, I've never really like lounged around, you know, in my birthday suit, but there was this weird disassociation that started happening where I avoided mirrors completely. Even fully dressed, walking around any reflective surfaces, I like averted my eyes. There was this weird thought in my mind where it's like, that's not me. Like, you know how you walk past like the library and you like check your hair and you're like, I look good today. No, I couldn't do that. If I walked by the library looking at the floor, couldn't do it. It freaked me out to see myself in head to toe read, and it was weird. That disassociation did happen with me. The other article, the other quote that we talk about is, now we walk along the same street in red pairs. No man shouts obscenities at us, speaks to us, touches us. No one whistles. There's more than one kind of freedom. Freedom to and freedom from. There was one instance where I was walking by and there was these two guys like egging each other on that one of them should talk to me, and neither one of them did, but it was weird that they were talking about me like I wasn't there. Like I couldn't, like, I'm like, bruh, you're scared of a girl in a bonnet? Like, what is that? And so that happened, but she's right. I wasn't catcalled. I wasn't harassed. Not that it happens very often, but, you know, guys will do whatever. It was actually the girls that couldn't look at me. And it was weird. And I tested it. And I was like, I would try to make eye contact with females. And it was absolutely disheartening. Like, I would look at them and they would avert their eyes. I was like, is it me? And I think it was. I think I was a callback to something that they just didn't want to acknowledge. They didn't want to, I don't know if they thought I don't think they recognized me as a handmaid, but maybe they thought I had someone think that I was like a nun. Or maybe it was like or Amish, or like a religious sect where women are objectified and silent. And so I think if you walk around like that, I mean, like, how would you react if one of these like fundamentalist churches like randomly had a woman around? Like, you don't want to violate her privacy or her family's values. And so it was really weird. You would think you would find camaraderie amongst your own kind, because I mean, I was obviously female, and I thought maybe the girls would be more curious of like, what is she like? Is this like a religious thing? Is this, you know, is this a cult that I'm, you know, being exposed to? But no, it was actually the women that didn't want anything to do with me. So that was weird. We are fascinated, also repelled. They seem undressed. It was taken. So it has taken so little time to change our minds about things like this. Then I think I used to dress like that. That was freedom. Westernized, they used to call it. And it's really weird, but when I went back to jeans, it felt weird. And it was weird that it felt weird, because I almost felt like kind of naked. I got used to like the swooshiness of the dress, and it's a big dress. It's like a full-on dress, and the bonnet and the cape and all these things. And when I went back to jeans, I was like, you don't think I've been in jeans all my life? And when I put them back on, I was like, gosh, you can see everything. Like, look at my butt. Like, it felt really weird. And I was like, dang, like it took like literally 4 days for me to get used to like a dress. And I was like, okay. You think these lifelong habits are part of you, but really it takes so little for them to change. I did have second thoughts when I put on the dress because it was so different, but I was like, no, that's how Offred felt. Offred was from our world, and she was just like me. She had a life. She wore jeans, and in fact, it seems like she was walking around on a beach in a bathing suit. That's braver than me. So for someone like that to be subjected into wearing a dress, it's like, no, that emotion that I'm feeling where it's like, what is this? This isn't like my style choice. That's what she felt. And I was like, oh, well, that's normal. That's the reaction that she has as well. The other quote is, it's strange to remember how we used to think, as if everything were available to us, as if there were no contingencies, no boundaries, as if we were free to shape and reshape forever the ever-expanding perimeters of our lives. I was like that too. I did that too. A lot of the nuances that came out of this were that I didn't know how much I counted on music. Music was banned. It's actually one of the things that affects Offred the most, because the only songs that she thinks of are like, she couldn't remember the lyrics to Amazing Grace, which is like so burned in our brain to think that one day you could forget the lyrics to that song. I remember I cheated a little bit, like I think on the last day, and I snuck some music, and I was like, it wasn't even a song I liked. It was like some dumb little techy music, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. It was weird. I love chips. Like I don't know if you can tell, but chips are like my vice, and I was like, I don't want to live in a world where my hot Cheetos aren't, part of my life. And it's a lot of these little things that, you take for granted, that you don't realize it's a privilege. We're so used to it, we begin to think it's a right, but it really isn't. It can be taken away. Yet there's an enticement to this thing. It carries with it the childish allure of dressing up, and it would be so flaunting, such a sneer at the end, so sinful, so free. Freedom, like everything else, is relative. I remember there was one day where I think we were in English 2900, and it was already like towards the end, and I was going a little crazy, and it was before Jenny got there, but I took my bonnet off, and I was like, I'm not a handmaid for right now. And I was talking to you, and I was talking to other people in our class, and I felt like, it was such a relief to just like take the bonnet off and not stick to the rules of like, someone has to talk to me before I talk to them. And it lasted for like 5 minutes, and those 5 minutes got me through the rest of that day and a little bit into the next. Because freedom is relative. And so I went from doing that 24/7 to just treasuring these little 5 minutes of free conversation with you and Kiana, and it was really good. And the last one, I think, pretty much sums up my experience as a handmaid. I wait, I compose myself. Myself is a thing I must now compose, as one composes a speech. What I must present is a made thing, not something born. I accidentally kind of did this since day one. When I had to walk past the high school, that was tough. Walking past a bunch of teenagers dressed as like something that looks like something out of, the Scarlet Letter. And I think actually they might have been reading it, because one girl was absolutely horrified. She was like, and I was like, oh my God. And she was like, that can't be. No, she was like, I think I freaked her out. I don't think it was like a happy surprise. It was like, I don't know what Trump had been doing that day in the news, but she was like, oh my God. And then like, other high schoolers were like elbowing each other, like, hey dude, check that out. Cause I had to walk that little stretch every single day. And I think at the time that I was walking onto campus, it's like their PE time. And so it was like, so some of them were cool, but I remember that first day, she almost like screamed. She was like, and I was like, but I couldn't give myself away, because like to smile at her or to give any indication that I know my presence is alarming would be breaking character. And so I kind of like, I giggled the whole way to school, and then as soon as I got on campus, it was like cold stone, like nothing shocked me, nothing showed upon my face. And I think that's what Offred has to do. All the things that happen to her, she has to be complacent. She can't be angry. She can't be sad, because if she gives into those emotions, like she said, she loses her sanity. She loses her hope of finding her daughter and reuniting with her family. And so it is something that you have to fabricate. If you're going to go through something where your freedoms are taken away, you have to find a happy place within yourself where you're safe, or it's just not going to happen. So yeah, those are the quotes that I picked. I know there's different editions of the book, so I put it by chapter and then by paragraph. So if you have your own book, you can look up the context of it and what it means to Offred. So you want to do the Q&A?
Sure, okay.
I don't know if you would want to answer some of these as well.
I don't
So,
know what your costume.
oh, I don't want to wear it right now. Do we do it? Oh my gosh. Okay. Thank you, Cindy. This is my sister Cindy, and that's Camille. It is like a legit dress, guys. And I've lost weight since I got this dress. It's like a good amount of weight. I'm having flashbacks. And I'm back. I'm wearing makeup. Oh, I couldn't wear that. Could not wear makeup. Not allowed. Oh, I know. And I don't have eyebrows if I don't put them on myself. Like, it's getting better, but I remember thinking, oh, I'm so ugly. I look like a baby with just like my nose and my eyeballs. And no, it was awful.
Sure. Okay. So the first question is, what was your goal with this project? What did you want to achieve?
Honestly, I was chasing a good paper. I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to see how people would react, and I want to figure out if, misogyny is really so prevalent in our society anymore and things like that. It was really just like, let's see what happens kind of thing. I didn't really have a goal in mind. I ended up learning quite a bit. But I think initially it was just out of sheer curiosity.
So I think the next question can also be answered by Professor Jenny. So, do you think Atwood's vision of the future is realistic? Why or why not?
Unfortunately, I everything in the novel has precedent in this world. Maybe not in America, but every single part of The Handmaid's Tale has some kind of historical context to it. So you already have women that are kidnapped and forced to have other people's children. Usually elite people, and usually it's the men in that relationship that have the power, that they want a baby, they want their own children. And so I do think that can happen. More to the point of it, I do think that we're reaching a point in our society where the government has become so polarized that, yeah, it is completely possible for the government to be overthrown by zealots and replaced by something with its own theology as well. And so, I absolutely think that can happen. And it's not just the control that they exert over women. If you read the book, you know that the men are subjected to roles as well. They get assigned a wife if they're lucky, or they can, if they don't comply, they can get sent to the colonies and clean up nuclear sludge or whatever. And so we kind of already do that. If you don't comply with the rules, you get sent to prison. And so, there are parallels literally everywhere.
It seems that your mom is telling us to ask where you got the dress.
Hi, Mom. My mom made it. So we went downtown, and she bought the fabric, and it was really hard to get the right shade of red. But we found it in like the fashion district, and then we came back and she measured me, and it's holding up.
Very nice. Would you care to answer, Professor Jenny?
Yeah, I have a totally different perspective on this because this book was published in 1985 and none of you were born. Maybe you were born? Okay, you were very small. But in 1985, I was 15 years old, and I was a kind of punk rock kid who dropped out of high school and landed in college. And my first year in college, this book, everyone was reading this book. And so I read it, and at the time, I just didn't think this could ever, even though at that time there was a very conservative government, and Ronald Reagan was in power, and I grew up being afraid of nuclear war, and I grew up with being raised by liberal hippie people with very conservative people around me. This book seemed totally like, oh yeah, that's just this crazy fantasy book. But I became a big fan of Margaret Atwood. I read a lot of her books over the years, and I would return to it periodically. And the thing is that when the election of 2016 happened, and some of the things started coming out right after the election, I started finding out more about Mike Pence than I had previously known about Mike Pence. I started to think like, well, maybe I want to look back at The Handmaid's Tale. Maybe that would be useful. Maybe that would give me some new insights. And I was really shocked in teaching it for the first time after so much time to just see all the pieces of it that I recognized in terms of what it looks like to have authoritarianism come into power. And in the parts where she says, like, well, we just went on with our own lives, we kind of compartmentalized that and pretended it wasn't happening, really related to how I felt. Mm-hmm. The other reason was that I went to a lot of protests after the 2016 election, and there was always somebody there with a handmaid. I didn't see any actual handmaids like you, but I always saw signs that said things like, "The Handmaid's Tale is not an instruction manual," or "I refuse to be a handmaid," or, and I thought, so I thought, like, okay, this is like a cultural touchstone. And I also thought that in college, you don't get to read a lot of you get to read a lot of serious literature, but books like this often don't get taught because I think they're too popular. They're not necessarily in the canon. And yet, this book is really, really fun to teach. If any of you become teachers, I strongly recommend you try teaching it. Margaret Atwood she's really wonderful for students because it's so easy to find meaning beneath the surface, and her books are so rich.
Sure. Next question is, if you were in the narrator's situation, what would you have done?
I think that one actually came from one of the Facebook posts, that question. If I were Offred, living as Offred, I probably would have done the same thing, because I would have a daughter and a husband that potentially may be alive, but I think that world would beat down an average person. I mean, I don't have kids. I don't have a husband. I don't have, anything. And at that point, she had lost everyone. So if I were to lose my family and I don't have something out there where it's like, no, I have to stay alive for such and such reason, I don't know if I would fight for my life or my sanity the way that she does. I think she was given an extraordinary set of circumstances, and she still fights through it. But it's got to be the determination that comes from being a mother. I don't think an average person would let all these things happen to them and try to stay sane and try to stay alive. I mean, you could try, but I really do think it's so pervasive that try as you might, it affects you. So I don't know if I would have committed suicide. That seems extreme, but I've never been...
Like the previous Offred?
Yeah. Like, previous Offred did kill herself, and it might be because she fell in love with the commander, but she didn't realize that the commander was never going to be with her, and so she had lost on top of having already lost everything else, and so I think that became too much. But I don't know if I would have fought the way she did. I don't have a daughter to fight for it, so that, that fire isn't there.
I guess the next question... Oh.
No.
The next question can also apply to Professor Jenny. So, what's the biggest lesson you learned from the book in your experience as a handmaid, and what's the biggest thing you learned from your experience of teaching The Handmaid's Tale?
Do you want to answer this one first?
Okay. I think the biggest thing I've learned from teaching it, and I taught it, the first time I taught it was last spring to a class of freshmen in their beginning writing class, and they were like, "Whoa, what? This book is crazy!" They were very shocked by it, but they liked it. I mean, they found it engaging. And I think the biggest thing I learned, I guess, is not so much big political stuff or stuff about gender, because I kind of already know all of that stuff. But I think what I keep getting out of it is how much a text can teach us, and how important it is to go carefully through a text and read it, and how many different ways, because I'm doing this again and again and again, and I discover new things, and all the things that the students bring to the class, and all the information I had. I've had students who had a lot of background in religion who were able to really open up pieces of the book that I hadn't been able to see. And people like Vanessa were able to open up, like, oh, that's what it would be like. So I guess it's just that the power of literature would be my general.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway is that sexism is on a spectrum. Obviously the really atrocious crimes against women are always going to be considered heinous. When you have like the rape of Nanking, no one is going to say, it wasn't that bad. But when you see things that are like your boss kind of hinting that, if you want to raise, you got to do a little extra work after work is over. And, when people are assaulted but not raped, you hear, it wasn't that bad. Or you hear things like this. And just because it isn't violent or it isn't fatal, it doesn't mean that it's acceptable. And when I did this experiment, Me Too hadn't happened and Time's Up hadn't happened. And we've had sex scandals before, but that's exactly what it was. Girls would come forward, and then it would get shut down. Like, the guys would use their money, their power, their connections, and she would go away, and the whole problem would go with her. And I think since Time's Up and the Me Too movement, what I've seen that's different in that scenario versus, all the things that had come out before that is that it's women telling their own story instead of a reporter who's got an inside scoop, a prosecutor who has evidence, a lawyer who is trying to get them to settle out of court. So essentially, and it's not something that I think guys would understand, but girls know that if I tell you my story, I'm telling you what hurt me, what affected me. If I tell a guy the same thing, he can report details about it, but that emotional trauma, that psychic violence that happens, that might not get reported because that's just not on their radar. And so the impact of Me Too and Time's Up is that it's women building up women, supporting women with the support of guys. Obviously, like, they can be allies as well. It's not like, women have to fight this fight for themselves. No, obviously, but in other cases, when guys try to help, they often take the lead. And that takes away the power from someone who's already lost a lot of their own advocacy agency. Like they already lost their agency. And now a guy's telling something about them on their behalf, about the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to them. And so a lot of the sexist stuff that has affected me wasn't something that Pence said or Trump said, because obviously we can write them off and be like, they're crazy. But it's like when my guy friends say things that, they think they're funny. And it's like, haha. But then you're like, it kind of eats away at you. And it seems harmless. But a lot of the stuff that is said when certain situations arise, like it filters in. And it kind of makes you doubt yourself. And I think if we stay silent, I think a lot of times we hear these things, but we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to be like impolite. We don't want to call people out and be seen as aggressive or seen as, like overly sensitive, which I don't know why that's an insult. I don't know why that's a stigma, but it is. And so one of the things that I learned through doing this is that when I was a handmaid and I couldn't talk to people unless they talked to me, which was rare, it made me realize that I'm usually the first person to talk to someone, not, like someone comes up to me. You are the exception. But yeah, usually I'm the one to be like, hey, what's up? And then the conversation starts. I didn't know that. And so I remember really hating the times I didn't speak up versus like, oh, remember when you said that one thing and that was really wrong and you ended up hurting someone's feelings? Like, that's not this time that you regret. You regret, like, seeing your friend get hurt or, you know, women being put down. And you're just like, we're so trained to be nice that, you know, we shut ourselves down. They don't even have to do it for us. We do it ourselves.
So, at the end of the book, what do you think happens to Offred? And then, I guess diverging a little bit from the book, what do you think is going to happen to Offred in season 2 of the Hulu show?
Have you seen the trailer? Oh, the trailer's insane. Yeah, no, she apparently gets into the van and she escapes and she sees Nick again and, you know, there's a weird... She's leaving a house. Like, she's leaving a safe house. And she looks beat. Like, oh my god, she looks terrible. But she's also got this fire that she didn't have before. Because remember, she had to have the veneer of, like, the perfect handmaid and, you know, pious and demure and all these things. And so she's angry in the second season. And so I'm thinking we're probably going to see her with Moira again. Because Moira got out. So, sorry, spoiler. So I think we're going to see her and Moira team up. Her daughter is still out there. We did see her. She's still alive. And so I'm thinking they're probably going to go chase her. I don't know what's going to happen with Luke. I really don't, because I think the series had an entire episode dedicated to him. And he's living with some girl up in Canada and... like having lattes.
Yeah, never trusted him.
Like, I mean, I don't know if because I mean Margaret Atwood is involved.
The cat,
I don't know. I still have conflicting feelings about Luke because I mean, people forget that he cheated on his wife with her, and like that's not to stigmatize like adultery or anything like that, but it's like he was supposed to be married to somebody else. And he didn't care. Like, he went for her anyway. And that's kind of where they got their start. And so I could see him, like, doing something like that again. You do it once, you could do it again. But yeah, I do think we might see the downfall of the commander and his family. Because how are you going to explain your handmaid being whisked away by rebels unless he's probably going to face the music... in the next season.
And then the historical notes at the end.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't want to touch upon that. Yeah, no, he definitely gets get what's coming to him eventually.
So, how can readers of The Handmaid's Tale use Gilead to think about their own society or to frame it?
I mean, I feel like we already kind of talked about that, but I think this is like the most extreme scenario where so many things would have to line up to get to this point. But I mean, you know, the Third Reich didn't happen overnight. You know, it started very subtly with, you know, propaganda not being seen as propaganda, seen as fact. And then people believing that, and then you know, creating ignorance and fear, you know, being fueled by hate, and then you debase a group of people so much that when they finally attack them, you're like, who cares? Mm-hmm. No big deal. And so what I think we should look at The Handmaid's Tale for is warning signs that, you know, we should have like a little, like a hot to cold thing, you know, and as the situation gets a little worse, we got to be like, I don't know if you should be taking away these rights from women, you know, and, you know, should we really allow this to happen? Well, no, and things like that. And so it's a warning, and I think Margaret Atwood wrote it in that way of like, if this current trend continues, this is one way we could end up. I don't know if you want to answer that.
So, I mean, this has two parts. So, in The Handmaid's Tale, who in that society is worse off? And is this a situation in which ignorance is bliss? Or is it better to know what's going on with you and the society than to stay ignorant about it?
Aunt Lydia talks about the future generation and how it's going to be easier for the next generation of handmaids because they never would have known the other life, where there was college and education and all these things. And that might be true. Like, they literally don't know what they're missing out on, and they might be happier for that reason. But if the truth is what's forbidden, you knowing that truth, that's a little bit of a rebellion. That's a little bit of, you taking back your agency. And so if you know the truth and you know what's going on, I think that's better than, oh, she doesn't know. Because you feel things no matter what. So I think it's always best to know.
And so we talked a little bit about the rules that you had to follow to be authentic as possible. But why do you think women weren't allowed to read in the Republic of Gilead?
I think it goes back to what they want a handmaid to be. To be a good handmaid, you have to be pious, you have to be quiet, and you have to have babies. None of those things are achieved through reading. And so reading actually trains your brain to see details, to see patterns, to question whether or not something is true. And that is like the exact opposite of what they want their women to do. They don't want anybody knowing the truth, really. They're just trying to keep a lid on everything. And I think when you educate a society, you educate a group of people, you're giving them tools to move forward with their life. And if the whole point is to put them in a box, reading isn't something that you want them to do. That's the whole reason that when there were slaves in America, they weren't allowed to read. They weren't allowed to learn how to read because we didn't want them getting smart and making plans and writing letters and finding a way out. It's a way of truncating someone's resources. If you're not literate or you don't have access to it, there's 1.5 million things you won't be able to do. So.
Yeah, that concludes all the questions.
Okay.
Oh, that's okay.
I could just sum it up real quick because I know we all kind of want to go and dig into some more food before we go. But I did include, I wrote a blog about the experience. We only did 4 days, and so there's only 4 entries. But after that, the reflection part that I submitted for my final, I called it historical notes because there's one in the novel. And so this is like a part of it. What I did was essentially handmade light. I still lived in my house. I still saw my family. For the most part, I knew that it was fake and it wasn't real. But there's a lot of people that have similar circumstances and they've already lost their family. This is happening all over the world. And, I can't imagine what it's like to live with these circumstances and to have lost everything already. Like your home, your town, your family. Like I saw my family every day and that helped a lot. I can't imagine what it would be like if I had kids and suddenly I don't, and now I'm thrust into this other family where my job is to have a baby. That would be weird. I have been in student government. I have run, literature club. I've done a lot of things where I take on leadership roles. And I've done a lot of conferences and a lot of things that girl power. But it literally only took 3 days to undo all of that. And it's crazy because I always thought I was a confident person. I thought of myself as someone who is comfortable talking to a crowd and speaking her mind. And then through this, I realized speaking your mind builds that confidence. Confidence isn't something that I was born with. And it was really weird because I never thought that was a two-way street, but it is. The more you talk, the more confident you are. And the less you talk, the less confident you are. And so within 3 days of me not talking freely, that confidence was completely shattered. And it led to a lot of self-doubt and insecurity that I thought I was immune to, but you're really not. No one ever is. You know, we all have these moments of doubt. You know, I walk around thinking I can do whatever I want. But that doesn't mean that I don't sometimes question myself. And it's crazy, but I think that, you know, because I had this idea that if women are being oppressed, it's their job to fight, to stand up, to say what's wrong and protest. But through this experiment, I realized that's a very, like, an American ideal, and it's very middle class. If you're working class or you're below the poverty line, how could I possibly expect you to advocate for yourself if you're worried about what you're going to feed your 6 kids? You can't march. You have 3 jobs you need to do. You have, you know, all these things that you need to take care of. And so when you see countries where, you know, women are so oppressed, you know, it comes from a place of privilege and ignorance to say, well, why don't they stop it? Why don't they just, you know, protest? You know, you see when they kidnapped all these girls, where was it? Like Nigeria. You're like, why did they just take them? Why didn't they fight back? There's so many things that happened up until that point, and they don't have that ability. You know, we take for granted that I can protest. If there's a Trump protest tomorrow downtown, I can dress up as a handmaid. I can wave my little sign around. I can say, you know, F Trump and all this stuff, and I can be pretty sure no one's gonna shoot me for it. Yeah, but I mean, who knows?
No, the crowds are very nice at the protests.
Yeah, you know, there's camaraderie and stuff, but no one's gonna hurt me for speaking my mind. And so, facing that reality of no, protesting is a right, that was harsh. Not everybody has that right. So I think at the end of the day, my story had a happy ending. I was able to take this dress off and, you know, self-care. That entire weekend, I watched a bunch of Disney movies. I watched Moana on a loop, and I was just, you know, dealing with, I love that movie. It's so important, too, because it's like, I have Moana, and I'm like, I'm alive. But yeah, no, like I had been through so much stuff, and I was so deprived of music that I don't care that I listened to it 300 times. But that's what I did. But there are millions of women around the world. Their story ends in tragedy. You know, all the things that are happening in Syria. People are dying. They're dying every day. And they're dying here. You know, I mean, trans women are murdered for being themselves. And you don't have to go far. You don't have to go into this fantasy realm where, you know, the religious part of the country is now in charge and we all have to abide by their rules. Stuff is already happening. You know, to some people, Gilead is real. And so, yeah, that's my piece on that. Do you want to say anything? Wrap up?
No. Thank you, though. I think the most important thing for me when I read your blog was this realization that I realized too that to some degree women are complicit in their own oppression, and this book uses that as a major sub-theme: how women harm other women and how women keep other women down. And I think that's absolutely true. But it is also a real assumption that women can just stand up and rise up.
Mhm.
And when I very first taught this, I had a class that wanted to punish Offred. They basically thought she was a slut and that she should have escaped. And you know, I was just like shocked by that. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, I do think that she does talk about being complicit in your own oppression, and even more so, the oppression of somebody else. So it's kind of like what, I forget who said it, but it was about how someone was asked, like, how did you possibly let Hitler do all these things? It's like, well, first they didn't come for me. They came for that guy. And then they came for that guy. And then they came for this guy. And then when they came for us, there was nobody left. And so I think it's the whole idea of, if you let someone else be oppressed, they're not the only victims. You are now having to be okay with that. So like if you see, you know, someone taking advantage of a woman, it's not just the woman that's affected. Now you're going to have to live with the fact that you saw this go down, you saw this happen, and you didn't say anything. And that is going to haunt you as well, even though it didn't happen to you. And so the policing that women do, I think girls tend to do this thing where you said we size each other up.
Yeah, I mean, you know how women do that? You're taught to do it at a very young age, and you look at men and you think there's a man. But you look at women and you start calculating things about the way they look. And at least I was taught to do this. I assume it's not an innate quality. Mm-hmm. Women's magazines have elaborate schemes for how you can categorize women. And I did an experiment once where I tried to notice every time that I sized a woman up and thought, wow, I wish my hair looked like that, or whatever I was thinking, you know, in ranking people in this bizarre way. And it was really hard, and I was giving up a lot of psychic time to trying to track how often I was doing it, because I realized I was doing it all the time. And that these kinds of insidious, what Virginia Woolf would call phantoms, not realities, these kinds of little things they eat at our essentially our culture and our souls, are the really problematic things. And Atwood has an interesting way of making you aware of that.
My old professor is watching this. Hi, Dr. Haas. He's a great professor. He taught me at Cerritos. So I think girls, especially when you're younger, I think once you're older and more mature and more self-assured and you have your life, it's a lot easier to kind of just be okay with other females. But as a young single female, I do tend to size women up. And I remember once watching Sarah Huckabee talk, and I was with my friend, and she was going on and on doing her, you know, verbal gymnastics trying to get Trump out of his latest scandal. And I was watching her for like 5 minutes. I was like, like everything, it was just frustrating me. And I was like, ugh, she's so ugly. Look at her. Like, gross. Like, I can't believe that they don't have like a makeup artist at the White House. Like, come on, you can do better than that. And my friend was like, are you listening? Are you even listening to what she's saying? All the ways that she's trying to like justify these actions. You're just so focused on what she looks like and trying to like discredit her that way that you're not even hearing that like the stuff she's saying is way worse than the stuff that is on her face. And it's like, that was a reality check. I was like, yeah, no, she's a terrible person, not a terribly ugly face, you know. Like, if she was saying nice things, would I have that same opinion? Probably not. But yeah, no, I think girls are trained. I don't think I'm a mean person. I don't think I'm competitive in any way, but I think girls are trained to compete with each other, size each other up, and there's a lot there, I think. I think that's it. I do want to thank Professor Jenny for giving us the room in our class to do these kinds of experiments. And, I think I had been drilled to do A papers before, and I think I was kind of trained to take emotion out of my own papers. That wasn't valid in my college, and in fact, you got marked down. If you got really emotional about something, then it would get circled and like slashed. And so I love that here you can't be just cut and dry about something. And so I've learned that when you cut out your emotions, you're not just cutting out the bad stuff. You're cutting out optimism, you're cutting out creativity, you're cutting out hope. And so if you just listen to your logic and your reasoning, you're going to look at the facts, and most of the time, if you just look at the bare bones of something, you're going to see that something might not be a good idea, and logic tells you not to do it. Like if I was the student that arrived here, and this was the assignment, I'd be like, I would fail that. Because it's like, you don't have that hope. Hope is a feeling. We shut those down. And so, I think if something isn't emotionally connected to your brain, you're stuck. You can't be going through life, having your brain where your heart should be. You need both. And so that was a really important lesson, that you need to have your heart into something, to feel it, to believe it, to move forward with it. I think it's really hard to be a woman and to find projects that are new and bold and unique. And then it takes a certain kind of woman to go after that, because it's like we've been told over and over again, that's not your place, that's not your space, that's not your right. And most often than not, the person who gives you the opportunity for this is a woman herself. So Professor Jenny brought us this book and gave us this opportunity. And I do think it is opening the door for more. Now I can see how someone else can repeat this experiment and see things for themselves. And so I think women need to stop policing each other. We need to build this up and stop seeing each other as the competition. We got to form better bonds. I think that's my takeaway. So I think, thank you all for coming, though.
And please.
Okay. All right. Thank you to everyone who watched on Facebook. I will be posting this later. Okay?
Wonderful.